Hello and welcome to the Voice of Reason podcast. Today's guest cast. Hello, I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's guest is Annie O'Brien, who is a spokesperson for a women's advocacy group in New Zealand, south of where I am, and I guess north too, if you just go all the way around the globe. You go over the top and down below, down under. I think New Zealand's down under, isn't it? Is it like a double down under? Is that how their politics run? Double down under. In this conversation, we talk about how her views on feminism has changed since the rise of gender ideology and how her politics have shifted into a more coalition building stance rather than just straight activism and combativism. And we talk about feminism. We talk about the direction of the world, her interest in American politics, and many other things. This is a very fun conversation. It's one of those conversations where I just kind of pluck one of those voices out of Twitter that I've been following for so long to give them a chance to express themselves in a different format. Annie also has a podcast that is just now getting off the ground. It is linked below. Do check it out. Without further ado, here is Annie O'Brien.
I have two cats wandering around, so if you see them, that's who they are.
I always upset people by not having cats in my interviews, and so it's nice when they jump in the frame.
Yeah, they've definitely made an appearance in a few work meetings, so
good.
My colleagues are like, well aware of them.
What percentage of your work life is virtual at this point?
Now it's almost optional by choice. So in New Zealand, we're pretty open at the moment. We did just get one case of COVID in the community. So that was in the news yesterday and everyone's freaking out. So since the lockdown we had early last year, it's more that people are choosing to work from home now, which I do a lot of the time. But yeah, it's not because of lockdowns or anything like that, though we may end up back in one because our government was pretty proactive last time.
Did you, from your point of view, was that worth it? Do you guys think that they did a good job?
It's really hard to tell because people are very, very supportive of Jacinda. She just won a majority in the election. And while I have a lot of respect for her, I don't think that she has saved us. I think that we've got a moat around our country of thousands and thousands of kilometres of ocean, and that helps us a lot. While I think maybe the first lockdown did help, I do worry about some of the laws that were pushed through and that kind of thing. So I think I'm worried about where we go to from here because we've got one case in the community and it's treated as if it's the end of the world, and you look around the world and there's a lot more going on, and everyone's very upset because we don't have the vaccine yet, and I'm of the opinion we shouldn't, because we should be giving it to the countries that have mass deaths at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's there's a cost analysis everything's politicized right now. Well, yeah, everything's always political, but everything is very turned up politically. But there is kind of this dance to play with how much do we want the government really controlling us because of all the tools they have to control us now, and how are they treating us with issues that are beyond just the COVID or some sort of disease or even national security, the way that some governments are meddling in some issues that you and I participate in on the Twitter sphere.
Yes, and we're definitely in for a big year on that front. So I'm a little bit cynical about our government because I know what they have on their agenda that they've communicated in terms of bringing back the sex self-ID bill that we stopped in 2019, I think it was, early, and a few other bills around that topic. And I am suspecting that they will use situations as cover to push stuff like that through in a way that probably doesn't get the scrutiny that it should. And so, yeah, I guess that's where we have to make sure that it does.
Were you involved in that counter push to this gender self-ID law? What was it called in 2019?
So it started in 2017. It first came up, and it's called the Births, Deaths, Marriages, Relationships Registration Act. So it's nice big title.
Do you guys believe in acronyms?
Yeah, BDMRR bill.
Okay. You guys can work on that a little. BDM.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a horrible. It's actually an administrative bill, and they just piled a whole heap of amendments into it. So there was stuff around, recording deaths and all that just needed to go through just as administration wise. And what they did was they thought they'd just sneak this in with it as like, oh, it's just a change to how we manage birth certificates. Whereas actually it was just self-ID. And so we were basically able to, so I'm the spokeswoman of Speak Up for Women, which is an organisation here in New Zealand. And yeah, we're the group that pushed back and stopped it back then. However, a new government has come in where our Labour Party's in the majority now. And that means that they can push through things that they couldn't before. So they've brought it back.
What's your trajectory coming into this new land? This particular issue around gender and sex is really shaking up how people identify as, there's different terms for your country, I'm sure, but liberal and conservative or left and right are being upset by this. Where were you in 2010?
I was a lefty.
Or something like that. Okay,
yeah. So I was a real lefty. And I don't think my values have changed. I think that the parties around me have. So in New Zealand, we barely have a right, really. So both of our major parties sit at centre left and centre right. And so when people call our national party, who are the centre right party, Conservatives, it's kind of funny because they probably sit to the left of the Democrats. So, so we are very liberal anyway. But I was a Green voter previously, which is probably the furthest to the left that you can get. And my politics have changed a lot in that my values haven't, but how I see them in relation to politics has. I've seen that the left, as with everywhere in the world, the left has been where this new wave of misogyny and homophobia and everything around sex self-ID has come from. And, Speak Up for Women, we tried in good faith to engage with the left and to talk about the issues. And it really was slapped down. And so, it makes you rethink everything. Because you think if all of my values no longer are represented by the party I vote for, what am I doing here?
What was the kind of turning point for you, or were there a series of moments, and how did that culminate?
It was pretty early on in the kind of sex self-ID debate. So I'd kind of been quietly exploring everything, and I was in touch with a lot of British gender critical feminists, and I didn't really know if there was a movement in New Zealand. This was it would have been like 2014, 15, 16. And then when it started becoming public and a topic in New Zealand, I realised really quickly that the Green Party in particular were taking the opposite position to what I had come to. And they also were going to be quite vicious about it. So some members of Parliament from the Green Party have called me and the organisation that I'm part of some really horrible names, which I kind of think that no MP should really be behaving like that anyway. But so it was kind of seeing that behaviour, seeing the ostracism of women in particular who spoke out about stuff. I just said, like, I'm not having any of that. So I kind of moved slightly over to our Labour Party, and I kind of thought, okay, let's see, they might be okay. But given they're quite closely aligned with Greens, or they were, remains to be seen at the moment. But they too then basically reacted like that. And within their party, they have some pretty outspoken advocates for gender identity ideology. And to be honest, no party in New Zealand has spoken out publicly against it. I'm constantly in touch with a lot of MPs, and personally they agree. And I'm hopeful that perhaps this year our national party will start to speak out, because I think I guess they're waking up to the fact that that a lot of the woke stuff isn't popular with the everyday people. And as our government pushes that, the opposition has an opportunity to differentiate, I guess.
Yeah, that's really weird. You pointed to two things. There's the position of your party changed, but also the manner in which they treated you changed. When did you first start seeing this vitriolic this treatment of your particular viewpoint as I'm going to assume a feminist or gender critical feminist? When did you start seeing the treatment of that kind of go off the rails?
I would say probably, maybe 2015, 16, somewhere around there. It started to, it was already, there were already activists in the Green Party. Obviously, its foundation is in environmental activism, and that's how the party comes about. But I think it then has lent itself to being a natural home for other kinds of activism. And that's what's happened in particular around gender identity here in New Zealand. So our Green Party, I know a lot of women who used to vote Green who no longer do, because they feel that literally the first priority is gender identity, and most of us were probably voting for them more for the environment and for poverty, I guess, policies and inequality policies, and so the kind of activism stepped up probably around 2015, 2016, and then it was really, it's the online stuff. Like they have had a few different like official party Facebook groups that have had to be shut down because of how nasty they've got. And I think they now have one. I'm obviously not in it and blacklisted thoroughly.
Okay, you're not allowed.
Yeah, I'm really not allowed. But friends tell me that now their existing group is only able, you're only able to contribute in it if it's approved. So you do a post and then moderators approve it. So it's all very, it's a very, I don't know how it compares to overseas Green parties, but it's very young, activisty. It's overrepresented on Twitter. Yes. So I guess you can get an idea of the kind of rhetoric that kind of goes with it.
Yeah. I speaking of Twitter, I do enjoy your rhetoric on.
Oh, thank you.
It's fun watching you do the
Yeah,
sentence
not everyone
dance.
does, but
I got in trouble today for a joke, so it's always funny to
yeah.
see how you rile people
I'm in
up.
big trouble at the moment for being mean to Joe Biden. So.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. Yeah. How often do you get in trouble? Is this a regular?
Oh, quite regularly. And the thing is, because I now probably occupy quite a centrist space, I manage to upset people on both sides. There's no place more, I guess you get caught in the crossfire. So if I'm not upsetting people on the left, I'm upsetting people on the right because I'm trying to take positions. I'm trying to be balanced. I obviously don't get it right all the time, but at the moment, I'm supposed to be like, I guess, celebrating on the behalf of Americans for Joe Biden. And really, if Trump wasn't so perceived as so bad by Democrats, I think that they would probably have cancelled Joe Biden a long time ago.
I think it's in the works right now. I think the party is going to rift apart as soon as the afterglow of being free from this fascist dictator fades. Then the dust will settle.
Yeah, I'm very worried for you guys, and I think I don't know if Americans realize, but any kind of crazy politics you get up to gets exported. So the fact that he signed the executive order around like the women's issues and gender identity, that will impact how the issue is viewed here. So I think sometimes when I spend a lot of time talking about that kind of thing online, Americans are like, why do you care? And it's like, you guys export a lot of your bullshit.
And our good shit too.
You do. You make really good like movies and that kind of thing. And I think as well we're still there's still remnants of that idea, and I hope it doesn't get lost completely because it's the good part of American culture, I think. But the idea of the good guys who showed up to sort World War II out and then were, the absolute creators of the entertainment industry and all the like fun stuff that you exported. I think that's where the connection with a lot of, I guess, other Western countries is still there. But yeah, we get a bit of the bad stuff as well.
So what is your position now? How is your ideological position around being an activist or standing up or being a spokesperson for women's rights? How has that shifted? Where was it before it got enmeshed in this tussle with gender ideology? And how have you refined it, or where do you think it's going in this time?
I think I was very set in my ways and thinking that left was good and right was bad, and feminism could only exist on the left. And so in that sense, I was part of, I guess, the polarization that I now try and resist. And so this process of speaking for an organization of women, which we very deliberately made nonpartisan because this is an issue for all women, but initially was made by lefties. So we're quite left dominated still. But the process of dealing with the issue of sex self-ID, conversion therapy, those kind of things that keep coming up, because I was constantly being put in opposition to my natural home on the left, it forced me to start reassessing things. And it forced me to consider that perhaps I don't actually exist in either of these spaces. And I think perhaps it's time that we re-looked at how we measure political belief, because especially for women in this movement, we carry with us, I guess, maybe some of the economic leftism. We've got a lot of unionists in our movement. So we carry that through. But the parties that are supposed to represent us have left us behind in terms of social values, and our idea of the progress that women have made. And actually, I'm a lesbian myself, and I see them as having left behind lesbian and gay rights as well. So we don't fit not neatly on the spectrum. However, when people accuse me of being right-wing and conservative now, I've taken to saying, yes, I am conservative, if by conservatism you mean I'm seeking to conserve liberalism and democracy. So I do find that we are in a defensive position, which is often associated with the right, because they are the conservatives. They're trying often to stop the push of the left. And so we are in that position of trying to conserve, but we're trying to conserve the liberal values that the left won. So it's a very, very complicated situation. And I guess in terms of articulating my own position, if I'm to describe it on that traditional spectrum, I'd say I'm centrist, because I still have my same values in terms of, I guess, things like I'm a strong believer in universal healthcare. We've got it here. I think education should be paid for by the government. So I am in favour of public service and that kind of thing, which if I was a full-on right-wing, that doesn't fit with that kind of set of politics. So, I would say I'm centrist, but with the caveat that I think we've got to throw out the rule book on it. I think there's a lot of conflict within the feminist movement because people are trying to jostle and come to terms with what their politics are now that basically the left's rejected us.
Or as a category, or they've stripped that category of sex, and with that destabilized what you guys had shored up in a way.
Yes, and also in doing that, have been happy to stoke a conflict rather than hearing us saying, actually, what you're doing here is, destabilizing our rights. What you're doing here is actually quite impactful on women. In the reaction to that, they've created a huge conflict. And I think that politicians, lawmakers all over the world, this falls at their feet. They should have had the bravery and done their job and facilitated a conversation when this all started. It was the shutting down that sees us now locked in quite a rabid conflict in which we aren't able to communicate our very passionately held views on both sides. And really in situations like this, it's the responsibility of the people we elect to sort out these issues, and they haven't.
The way in which, on a larger, just zooming out from the particular issue of feminism and gender ideology and the tensions and the conflict there, and then how that's affecting feminism, just on a larger playing field, the issue around sex and females, which is traditionally from the left, is also on the vanguard of what is being suppressed, along with a lot of conservative people or far-right people, which are being shaken up and pushed out of communities, especially after the last month in America, and with the way in which social media is treating and the way in which the Democrats over here are wanting to suppress their ideological enemy and going so far as to say we are going to reprogram them or whatever. The feminist movement, the gender critical feminist movement specifically, those who fall within the category of TERF have been consistently pushed out of Reddit and Twitter and kicked out. And even earlier this week when that executive order was signed and Biden erases women came up, there was this natural hashtag or this natural battle that's been playing out over and over and over again for years between the trans rights activists and the gender critical feminists or females, specifically around female rights. And then Twitter inserts itself and starts to editorialize those things. Yeah. There's this... It shows, this particular issue shows that the platforms and the political establishment, broadly speaking, is setting a precedent towards squashing dissent, and it's not easily thought of as a left-right issue or left going against right. There is this ideology in particular, for some reason, is rather rabid and allowing, or like I interviewed Catherine Deves earlier this month with the way in which Victoria is allowing this gender ideology stuff to formulate some sort of really powerful state apparatus that can go around and punish people and accuse people and fine people without any oversight whatsoever.
Yeah, we're heading into that ourselves.
Are you guys going that direction?
So, yeah, we have had announced from our government that they are seeking to establish hate speech laws. So I guess that looks like they'd be similar to what is in the UK. And they have said that this has come out of the commission that reviewed the Christchurch massacre, which was when white supremacist terrorists gunned down 51 people in Christchurch, New Zealand, which is absolutely horrifying. And
that was what year
as a
was
country,
that?
I think, was it a year ago or 2 years ago? It was March. It was in March.
Okay. 2019.
Yeah. And like, the sentiment of the country is horror at that, and an absolute rejection of the espoused beliefs of this man, and yet there is now a cynicism because the government has declared that these hate speech laws have come out of this commission. But one of the primary things that is mentioned is gender identity. And everyone's kind of going, yeah, I'm not sure that was really a primary issue in the Christchurch massacre. And so they are using it to insert in those kind of ideological positions. And it's been written about here that basically the gender identity part of the law is pretty much probably being written in order to shut me and Speak Up for Women up. So it's a very bizarre situation to kind of know this law is probably going to get passed because the party that's pushing it has a majority in Parliament. We'll oppose it, but there's not a lot we can do if they decide to pass it. So it's very scary because it is a strengthening of the same beliefs that probably big tech are pushing as well, that the Democrats are pushing, which is around identity, around safetyism, and around, I guess, subjective offence being the primary over the right to speech and expression. And unfortunately, we don't have a First Amendment, so...
Oh. Okay. What level of your constitution or founding document is speech enshrined? Is it tacked on later on? Or?
So we've got a Bill of Rights, but it's not as definitive as your First Amendment. I think that's I seriously hope that the Democrats don't get at that, because I think it's the best thing that you guys have is that piece of legislation or founding document. So yeah, our Bill of Rights has it, but it's expression, and it is caveated by, I guess, the conflict between other things in the Bill of Rights. So it's it's not a strong document compared to First Amendment. And basically, once these hate speech laws are introduced, it'll be pretty useless. So yeah.
That's really interesting that they, it seems like, from what you're saying, they started out combating white supremacy, but ended up actually enshrining a bunch of stuff around gender identity.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you make that? How do you make that leap, guys? Like,
I know. And the very interesting thing in terms of where they started as well is that, don't ask me what year it was, but relatively recently we got rid of blasphemy laws that was still kind of hanging around from back in the day, which were mostly to do with obviously Christianity and not, saying things that were blasphemous. And there are elements of this bill and how they pertain to Islam, but also they could be applied to Christianity or whatever religion, that are essentially the return of them, because you no longer have the right to ridicule if that's going to cause offense. And so that worries me, because I feel like it's a regression. We're just widening the scope of it. So instead of it just being Christianity, it's
Is this these hate speech laws? Are they're enshrining Islam as a protected class? Is that part of them, or
the wording hasn't come out yet? But because of the way it's been, I guess, promoted through the media by the government and that kind of thing, it's very much been tied to the Christchurch massacres. And obviously, for those who aren't aware, that was targeted at the Muslim community, and they were praying when they were shot dead. And so the religious aspect of the proposed legislation definitely is at least implied to be pretty heavily protective of Islamic faith.
Doesn't that
which for me is problematic, because I think
with gender ideology? I mean, how can you have
no one's
both?
allowed to say that. You can't say that.
You're not, okay, you just
like,
don't think about it. Okay.
Yeah, you can't
And I
talk
just bring
about
that
these
up not because, because Islam, no matter how heavily it is implemented, but it does have a very strong idea of sex segregation.
Absolutely.
So the amount of just accepting or excerpting or casting aside how certain implementations of it are rather oppressive of women, just taking that aside, even without that in more liberal instantiations of Islam, there's still a very strong difference between male and female. So you have this gender ideology that's protected and this other thing. Huh.
So I'm interested to know, like, for example, if a Muslim preacher gets up and condemns homosexuality, and I then condemn, say, Islam for its homophobia, who's protected by the hate speech laws in this situation? Yes. So there's a lot of conflict that's going to come from it. And that applies also to women and gender identity. I mean, we know who's going to win there, because they've shown us time and time again that women don't win. But you could argue that some of the things that are said to women are completely hateful. And so what's the threshold, and who decides what trumps what? It's very complicated. And seeing what's happened in the UK with, people getting hauled down the police station for a set of tweets and that kind of thing, it's really scary. And I think we're really headed off the cliff we've seen others just run off. So
yeah. You obviously, just like what happened or what is implied by Biden's executive order. Again, sorry to bring it back to the United States here.
That's all right. I'm very interested in your politics. That's fine.
Biden signed an executive order about, and the wording's interesting, about gender identity and sexual orientation. He put gender identity before sexual orientation. So this gender identity thing, which is not defined in the document, is implied to be the trump card there. He also did one with equity, and he said that wanting to make the government fair for all individuals, including all these different identities. So it's implied.
If it's and he's already said it's all individuals.
Yeah. And he actually said in a speech that we are going to focus our recovery especially on these identities. So in encroaching, either he's throwing a bone to the so-called woke, or rather the identitarians, or he's giving kind of a gloss that we will take care to support more marginalized groups. Implied in what you're talking about and what he's doing is this calculus, this oppression, privilege calculus. So it's going to have to be worked out in this very silly fashion where you say, okay, well, let's look intersectionally about Annie. So she's white, and she's a female, and she's lesbian, but this other person's Islamic, or this other person's a trans individual or Islamic trans individual, and then you're going to have to go and identify as Islamic in order to fight against this, and then you have this huge thing. Yeah, you'll have this huge conversion thing because it's all based on self-ID, and you can change that at any time. Yeah. So it's a really big mess, and
it is, and it never ever considers class, which for me, coming from the left to the old left, is so messed up, because I think that our class, our level of income, the type of jobs we do, these are the things that we all have that we can measure, and you can have black or white, male or female, whatever. But if you've got one who is a high earner and one who is a low earner, that's the material difference. Yeah. Their lives are going to be more different based on that than anything else. And yet it never comes in. So, for example, I got myself in trouble for being far too sympathetic for Trump voters, but I could see a large portion of them feeling very displaced and very ostracized from their own country because of their whiteness and their maleness in some case. This idea of privilege couldn't sit with them because they were also extremely poor and living in places where, with huge levels of addiction, poverty, where traditional industries have shut down and they're having to look around for what do we do now. And so I have a huge amount of sympathy for them and the fact that they might not want to vote for a party that's just consistently telling them that they've got it better than everyone else, and that they should sit down and shut up. And I'm not saying that race and sex don't matter, obviously, but I think that when we forget class, when we forget the really important things, like the fact that poverty pretty much eradicates any privilege, really, most privilege, we're doing a disservice to huge groups of people. I can see why they'd, even if it was a protest vote for Trump, because it's a middle finger to the people who are disrespecting them and forgetting them. But you're not supposed to say that.
On the matter of class and class privilege, the government has the information to do the calculus on just based on your earnings. I mean, we have the IRS over here. I don't know what you guys have. Do you guys have a very
IRD?
IRD. Okay, so it's close.
Similar.
The government already has the ability and the straightforward calculus. Of course, it's gummed up here because we have such insane tax laws, but they already know who's privileged and who's underprivileged there to implement all this identity stuff, which is so subjective.
Them, right? So it benefits the people or the government or I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but if all the people who are actually underprivileged, they're in poverty, they all got together, regardless of race, creed, whatever, then the government might be in trouble because they'd have to actually answer for the fact that there are these huge amounts of people suffering. Whereas if they get everyone fighting about identity, then they're too distracted, they're not able to organise. I think that the reason union movements struggle is because of the amount of time spent on identity rather than addressing the material issues, which they should all have in common,
Yeah, there's that very explicit Democratic Socialists of America. They had a conference, and they spent so much of the time declaring their pronouns and making points of personal privilege, which makes them silly on the outside, but they're very always stilted in actually getting anything actually done. So it's interesting. Have you, in your adventures in feminism and breaking out of your left kind of side into more centrist side, have you seen any inroads on how to or what are rightists or right-leaning or conservative-leaning people willing to compromise on in order to form a coalition with you guys? What have you seen? Because I think that really exploiting that and bringing to light what people will be willing to compromise on, faced with woke on one side, radical right people, supremacists or whatever on the other, and then the globalist hegemony on top. Where would the right be willing to work or to cede some ground, and where would the left be willing to cede some ground in order to get something done?
At the moment, in my experience, the left is not willing to cede any ground. Okay. The right is. I found myself creating some good relationships, friendships with people who are on the right. The ones closer to the centre, obviously we align on a lot more things. They tend to, obviously they agree on the biological realities. For them, it's probably there's more ideology into it than there is for me in terms of gender roles.
Roles, yes.
And that kind of thing, depending on how, I guess, but it's interesting. I have a friend on the right, and he's quite conservative, but he has been really helpful for Speak Up for Women behind the scenes and supported me with, I guess, all this stuff. And he is anti-abortion, and I am pro-choice. And this has never been an issue for us because we just last year, we might have been the year before now, New Year's always throws me, we had reform on our abortion bill, so that's kind of been done, and so he's not actively trying to undermine my rights in that sense or anything like that. I know what he believes, but it's irrelevant to the work that we're doing on this. Okay. The law exists and protects me. We don't need to fight about it. And so it's just irrelevant. And I think a lot of women I hear have an issue with working on the right because of their stance on mostly abortion. And I know it's different in other countries where they're not as well protected as we are now. But it's my belief that as much as possible, when we're in circumstances that are so potentially dire with the legislation and that kind of thing, we should be working with people we have stuff in common with, and in spite of the stuff we don't have in common. And if they were actively trying to repeal the bill or something like that, it might be a bit different, but they're not. And so I definitely feel it's workable. And what's actually really funny, what's being conceded, is that there's quite a few religious righties who are quite openly fine with me being gay, which I don't think they would have been a while ago. I think that they've kind of gone like, oh, they're not trying to encroach and change stuff that materially affects me, being them, whereas this other stuff is trying to change my life, is trying to make me say things differently, and trying to tell me that what I see with my two eyes is not real.
And what they're teaching children.
And that's a major one. So I've spoken a lot with a religious guy who is really concerned about, so he heads up a group here, and he's really concerned about children. And what's really interesting actually is that some research came out last week. A group here had commissioned a piece of research in 2018 and in December last year. And it was basically on all the kind of issues around self-ID and around gender identity ideology.
Yeah.
And one of the issues was, should parents be able to opt their child into health and sex education, or should it be opt out? So it seems like kind of the same thing, but if it's opt out, then the parents, if they never hear about it, their child's going to go and just do it, and it takes proactive opting them out. Whereas if the default is that they're not in, and then you sign them up for it, then it's more of a proactive approach.
Yeah.
Anyway, the opinion has flipped in the 2 years since 2018. So this is it was a New Zealand-wide research, and people are now more in favour of opt-in because they are more conservative about how they feel about what's being taught to their children.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because virtually all questions in this piece of research, the survey, had fallen in our favour more so than they had in 2018. So people, as they learn more about it, are more uncomfortable with it. And it's to do with the things around children, a lot of it.
Yeah, that is an interesting fertile ground for coalition building, because you have abortion, which is about the babies and the mothers, right? Which is a very tense topic, and there's a lot of things in there. But if everybody meets a year later, 2 years later, about childhood, I think a lot more people will agree on protecting childhood and protecting children. And that can be a proactive thing that's just aside those other battles. That's a really interesting possible thing.
Yeah.
Was there
and I
a
think that's
rainmaker in the background? Somebody?
No, I think that was I think it was the connection, because I couldn't hear anything for a second. Unless my cats have taken up like some kind of musical instrument or something. But yeah, I think we definitely can work together on that. I know that a group in America, Women's Liberation Front, they've got a lot of grief for working with religious right groups. And I have a lot of sympathy for them. I think they do some great work. And I think a lot of what they get is actually pearl clutching from people who aren't doing as much work as them. And if, I kind of say, look, if you're not comfortable with who they're working with, then why don't you go and work with who you want to? And I honestly don't think we're going to be able to oppose this kind of stuff if we don't have some kind of allies. Because at the moment, we are on the outs of what a lot of us thought were our allies. And as honourable as it might be, like fighting alone and, shadow boxing, it's not effective, we need to be able to leverage influence and power where we can. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a mercenary in that regard. I'm kind of like, whatever needs to be done to protect women's rights, I'm not going to quibble over other politics. And I struggle a lot with purity politics, which you've probably seen on my Twitter. I just can't stand it.
I was thinking about that. Somebody brought up. I pushed back against somebody with purity politics because they brought up building coalitions with right-wing people and why we need to be. I think it was a female and a feminist. She was saying this is this issue is so important that we really need to attack right-wing views to get them to let go of their the stain of being right wing or the stain of whatever thing she was talking about. I'm like, once you go down the path of purity politic, your enemies will see that guilt by association really works to slow you down and to gum you up. So don't do that. Don't do that at all. In my opinion. And that's why I act a little bit dirty online to keep the purists out of my way.
I like it. No, I agree completely. Oh, sorry, my cat might make an appearance.
Don't make any apologies. The cats are absolutely welcome. Go ahead and put them on the couch behind you. There's a cat-friendly screen
down here. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that if we play purity politics, we lose. And I think, I see Megan Murphy, you've spoken to her before, and I've got a lot of respect for her. She came and visited us and spoke at one of our events, so that was cool. And I see her, she's on a larger scale than me, obviously, but I see her going through a lot of the same things I'm going through in New Zealand, where those of us who are kind of most visible in challenging this stuff are under the most scrutiny of who we work with, what we say, what we do. The level of perfection that we're sometimes held to, I don't think is very fair. And I don't see it existing in other movements. I wonder if it's a feminist thing that we do to each other. And I think when we get caught in this condemning each other based on who we're working with, and really trivial things, we just tear each other down, and then we're not going to get anywhere. And I've seen it obviously with Megan speaking about Trump and Biden as well. And I think she's of a similar perspective, which is that they're both awful candidates. You wouldn't want either of them, but you're supposed to say like bad orange man, yay Biden, and by saying that they're both awful, you are then, it's funny, all the like tropes that are used by, trans rights activists are then used by others in the movement to say, well, if you say that you're endorsing white supremacy, or it's really frustrating. I'm like, don't use their tactics within ourselves. It's so counterintuitive, and we're never going to succeed.
It's on a hopeful note, one way of looking at what's going on, depending on how large you think the threat is for your hobby horse or your issue, not to denigrate anybody's issue, but it's an opportunity. Being under assault is an opportunity to really boil things down, say, okay, what works, what doesn't work, and what causes us to not become them, and what about them did we participate in that we need to like let go of and kind of renovate our own politic, our own ways of interacting with people, and stuff like that. It's an opportunity, not to, this is not for me to say, but it's an opportunity in some respect for feminism to be more open, more welcome, and a place for broader coalitions. And I'm wondering, have you become friends with, what is a conservative feminist? Is that such a thing? And what is that?
They haven't been allowed, I don't think.
Okay.
And I think there's still a very strong perspective, which I don't share, that in order to be feminist, you must be left-wing because the class issues that are analysed by the left apply so severely to women. That is true, but the left's no longer analysing them, so I don't know what. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. So that's kind of my argument, is that, cool, but the left's not doing it, so... briefly to gloss the left analysis and how that impacts women, is that to look at women as a second class or somebody whose labor is taken for granted in some way? That's one aspect of it, would be, I guess, the free labor stuff in terms of child rearing and housework and that kind of thing, but also generally lower paid or lower valued jobs. And also the fact that when women are living in impoverished situations, they're more likely to have unwanted pregnancies, they're more likely to suffer domestic violence. So there's so much is connected to class, and not classes in like sex class, but classes in like income and economic class.
Yeah, it severely impacts women to be in a lower class physically and emotionally and so on and so forth. Because
you just need to look at women's prison populations. They are overwhelmingly from working class and poor backgrounds. Of course, there's exceptions, but and so it's kind of it's a huge part of considering the suffering of the most acute suffering of women, because once again, if we're looking at obviously there's issues that are applied to the whole sex class of female, but in terms of who is suffering the most from these, it's always going to be those who are in economically deprived situations, simply because of the issues that go along with them. So I'm privileged in the sense of having come from a middle-class family and living pretty middle-class now. And so the odds of me going to prison, experiencing domestic violence, those kind of things are a lot lower. So I think that is why often feminists see the left as being the only place feminism can exist, because it takes all that into consideration. My argument now is that they aren't doing that, so they are no longer justified in claiming that. I'm not saying that the right are, but I think we need to look at not turning people away because they don't have all the purest views. I've definitely met a lot more women who are on the centre-right in New Zealand who are kind of tentative about calling themselves feminists because they feel like they're going to get told off about it because they vote wrong, or but actually, they're there because they've got the same concerns as us. That they are. It's an issue that we really shouldn't be dividing on political grounds.
Well, yeah, if you erase the category of woman, then you can't do any analysis.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatsoever.
I guess we could do uterus have a analysis, but then what about all the women that have had hysterectomies? We get into all that, and it's just ridiculous. I think what I personally have learned through all this and through the behaviour of trans activists and the hostility of this whole situation is that I don't want to partake in polarised politics. I don't want to partake in being hugely partisan. There are things I will obviously have a position that's shared on one of the other sides, but I reject the idea that I can't be working with someone over here and someone over here, and the idea that I can't simultaneously, the dialectic of being like, this lefty is bad and so is this one, or I disagree with this person, but this thing that they did was actually really good. I try and kind of, obviously it's a work in progress, but it's definitely made me examine my own ideological echo chambers and that kind of thing, because it's so ugly looking at the mobs of attacking trans activists, and I don't want to be a part of that.
What else is there in your that you've been thinking about, either within this issue or beyond? What's another thing that's been tickling your brain?
I'm really interested in our education system, which is So there was a report done by an independent education researcher that looked into the New Zealand education system. And it shows that while our results, when measured against global results, are going down at a rate of knots, but when measured against our own marking, they're going up. So it tells you something's going on there. And so I'm really interested because in this report that I read, it really sparked my interest. It was calling for an end to what's called child-centered learning, which sounds really counterintuitive because of course you want your child to be centered in the learning. But what it actually is this idea that each child has to have individualized education, and that the child decides what they want to do, rather than approaching, as they did perhaps a while back, my dad's generation or something, with the teacher standing at the front and imparting knowledge in a much more dry way. And there's a school called Michaela School in the UK that does that. They've regressed back, but it's actually shown heaps of success. So I've got a lot of time for Catherine Burrable-Singh, who runs that school, and she's super interesting. And the reason why I bring it up is because I have seen in the reaction to this report in New Zealand and the reaction to how Catherine in the UK is treated, similar behaviour to like trans activist behaviour, where it's questioning an ideology, an established thing that the government system has decided this is what we do. And all of these people who generally purport to be leftists rush to protect the establishment. And they rush to say, no, this is what we do, and you're wrong, and you're hurting children, and all the hyperbole. So I find it really fascinating that you can take a completely different situation and different parameters, and the same behaviors are reoccurring. So it does fascinate me where, once again, where the majority, the establishment, wants us to ignore the evidence that says this is not working or this is not right. And the instinct of a lot of people is to protect them, which is like, when did we become establishment? When did the left become establishment? I thought the whole thing was like anti-establishment.
It's really, there's a lot of, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, like in terms of the gender identity thing, I find it really interesting that that these activists see themselves as, sticking it to the man and being like, counterculture and stuff. But I'm kind of like, if the big banks, if the government, if, corporate, everyone is putting pronouns and putting rainbows on everything, you are the establishment. We're the anti-establishment because we're saying, no, we don't like this.
Yeah.
But it's almost viewed the other way around.
There's a behavior, you're pointing to something that I've been watching and looking at, but there's this attitude of being reactionary or being very fundamentalist. And I guess, are you Gen X? You kind of seem like on the cusp.
I'm 30, so I think I'm right.
Yeah, you're millennial.
Yeah.
But you're millenniax, maybe. You're right there. But it seemed like we had an attitude where we kind of expected the right, the cultural right at least, to be very fundamentalist and very reactionary and very, going against a progressive stance.
Yes,
which the government was kind of slipping in there on a social issue or something like that. And that there is just a weird kind of mind screw to see that behavior, that behavior on this other ideological spectrum, this very fundamentalist, very reactionary, and then you're very correct with the man, so-called, being on their side and them not seeing that the drone that is dropping bombs on Syria might have a rainbow flag on it and a BLM hashtag on it, but it's still dropping bombs on Syria. It's a weird trick, and it seems it's really difficult to not go down some sort of conspiratorial conjecture. I do think that it was just kind of a groundswell of a certain personality type kind of meeting and getting in conjunction with the globalist or very large corporate interests, figured out that they could totally get away with what all those youth were fighting against them if they just did these certain virtue signals. Okay, well
how
we'll
easy is it for them to put a rainbow on something rather than actually addressing, like, I don't know, the fact that their CEO makes 500 times more than their bottom workers. How easy is it to just stick a sticker on and then everyone's like, oh, they're so great, they're so progressive, yeah. And it's just, now they don't have to deal with, like, people protesting about their pay and everything because they're just so, right on.
Yeah, they follow the Twitter mob when they dogpile on people, or they'll do all that woke virtue signaling, which is really good to kind of cover up, just like Biden's doing, like raising insulin prices, totally screwing over the energy sector in the United States. But at the same time, at least they got their gender ideology and they got their, their racial equity program.
And I find it quite funny that we're not allowed to talk about the trade-off there. So from what I read, correct me if I'm wrong, but with shutting down the pipeline, he basically deleted 70,000 jobs. And so there'll be people who really want that pipeline to be shut down. And there'll be environmentalists and all sorts. And then there'll be people who said, but you just deleted 70,000 jobs. And we're not even allowed to have that conversation about the trade-off because this is seen as the virtuous position, the environment, But actually, let's talk about, so now that this is not in use, where are you getting that product from? You're now going to go overseas and just get it from somewhere else. So the environment's still getting fucked either way. You're just cleaning your conscience by not doing it on your soil while deleting 70,000 jobs. So there's like more to it than just like, this is good and this is bad, but we're not allowed to measure that. We're just, this is virtuous. We must be anti-pipeline. And it's like, yep, I can see the harms. I can see why you wouldn't want that. But do you want to have a look and agree that there are harms over here as well? The fact that 70,000 people is a good sized town, it's like, it's a lot of people to lose work.
And not to mention the autonomy and the military problems that we don't have to get into. And I haven't read much into it, but like he's already advancing. I'm sorry, we don't need to talk about U.S. politics, but he's already going to war or something like that. He's already like, it's like, okay, back to the old good, or back to
business as usual in the USA. It's actually incredible, but we shouldn't be surprised because, like, as soon as he started appointing like all of these kind of old warmongers like to his team, it was like, okay, we're going here, all right. But I think for me that like you could argue to me that it actually is better that the pipeline thing was shut, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. I just want us to be able to have the talk, like have the conversation about it, to be able to not demonize the people arguing this side. And I think that's the thing. It's like when people are so religious almost about Biden or about the Democrats, the insulin thing, I got so much grief for that because I said, why has he got rid of this regulation that prevents pharma companies from not passing on their discounts, which brings prices down? And I was kind of asking, like, does anyone explain this to me? Why would he do it? And I just got so much grief for it.
Really?
And I thought, we can't talk about the price of insulin. Once again, who are the people who are diabetic predominantly? It's these populations we're not allowed to give a shit about.
That really cuts to the bone. It really cuts to the bone. But the OxyContin or whatever, the drug abuse
Yeah.
in poor communities, all of these problems, focusing. Actually, you do a lot better for a lot more people focusing on the money than you do on the identity.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it's much easier for us. It captures our hearts and our imaginations to talk about the identity. And that even happens it's just a human instinct to get tribal and
Totally.
to
And you can demonize, you can have the other, kingdoms and countries used to go to war just to unify because having a bad guy that we were all against was so powerful for collectivism. And so now we can bad guy, say white guys, we can be like, that's the bad guy over there. So let's all be this kind of unified group of here. It doesn't work in practice because then they start breaking it down even more. But it's this other thing. We're the good guys and that's the other. And we're justified in our actions and they are not.
Aren't we kind of doing that right now? We're the good guys.
Yeah,
because we don't good and bad guy anybody like those people over there.
I know, it is. It's a cycle, right? I guess it is something that there's something human about it.
Well, I mean, we have limited brains, and it's just a way to divide the world. It's like people who preach about non-dualism. They're like, we're non-dualists. Well, so you're not a dualist. That means that there's a duality between you and the dualist, or the non-binary. It's like, okay, well, you're not the binary. So there you go. There's another binary. It's just kind of how we operate, and kind of what I'm trying to do overall in my approach, specific through the medium of interviews. On Twitter, I do play the bad guy, or I get my
antagonistic,
and to shake off that purity, and I am antagonistic, but to provide a platform for people, or to explore ways in which we can decrease that othering, and kind of just poke our heads a little bit above the tribal level. I think that human beings are tribal and we can't escape that. And every time we do, we make a big mess of things. But there is a part of us that can be assured and can lift up and make broader communities without necessarily having to fight against something, or rather in the process of fighting for something, we actually gain a lot more of that magic unity dust that is being peddled right now. So it's just interesting to explore how people like you in your situation have kind of shaken up and say, okay, well, I need to compromise. I need to be a better player under the threat of being vilified. You then kind of mature in your own politic.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, the concept of needing to be tribal. I had a conversation with my dad actually yesterday. We're lapsed Catholics. He raised me a Catholic, but then he's kind of lapsed as well. And we were talking about the fact that as a whole, the West in particular, English-speaking world, I think America's a bit different, but there's been a real turn away from religion. And some will argue that's good. I would have previously been like, yeah, it's really good. But now I've got a few questions because we haven't replaced it with anything. So we've got rid of the church, of the belief system,
and the blasphemy laws.
Yeah, and the blasphemy laws. But we haven't replaced it with another way to gather as a community every week and to be self-aware and reflect on how we've behaved that week maybe, and how we treat others and that kind of thing. And so we've ended up with a void, and I'm not advocating that everyone should be religious, but I'm saying, how can we bring back this idea that we gather in communities that are there for the purpose of basically self-reflection, ethics, how we approach the world. And so we get that sense of community, of tribe, of these people think like me and care about me and everything. And we also get the opportunity to examine ourselves, because I think that's what's lacking with a lot of people online, is there's no self-examination, because we're just not encouraged to do it, especially in this online space. It's all about projection and what other people are doing wrong. Whereas I think, we used to spend a lot of time sat still thinking about our morality and that kind of thing. And I don't want to give off the opinion that I'm like being kind of evangelical or advocating for I guess us all to sit in church every Sunday, but go ahead if that's your thing. I'm just interested in the void that's been left, and how we can create meaning and community without it. Because I think we need to do something proactive. I think we need to. If we're not going to have religion fill those functions, what do we want to put there? Yeah.
And politics is a very poor substitute.
It's a very poor substitute.
One, we're all congregating around grievance, which has problems. Two, whatever self-awareness or self-reflection that is practiced tends to not really be self-reflective. It's just, it's corrective. I'm like, oh, I didn't say the right thing, or I have to apologize because I said the wrong thing, which has the overture of some sort of confession on a way, but it's not
performative. Yeah.
But it's performative. It's all outside. It's really, we're like that fish that kind of came up to the surface too quick and barfed out all of our guts and then sucked them back in. It's not actually, I don't know where that came from.
That was amazing analogy.
Like, okay, there's all your crap, but
you
didn't really fix yourself or anybody else, but it stinks now, I guess. I don't know.
No, it makes sense. It's just very unique.
So you started, you're about to start a podcast or a media company of some sort? What's your project?
It's very, very small. It's just me. I had previously done some podcasts for Speak Up for Women, but I want to do one where I can talk about more than just the women's issue, because I think it's interconnected with so many other issues.
Okay.
So I have started a podcast. I've got 3 episodes so far. It's very little.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it's called Thought Crimes with Annie O'Brien, because we commit thought crimes every episode.
Is it an OnlyFans and it's spelled HOT crimes? No?
I'd probably make more money if it was.
There's money over there.
Yeah, so it's basically I've done one little kind of like monologue one, and then I've done 2 interviews with just Kiwis. So I've got an ex-journalist and a guy who works in the film and TV industry, and I'm just talking to them about identity and free speech and stuff. Mostly it's about freedoms and free speech.
Okay.
So yeah, it's very small and amateur. So
well, it just started a couple weeks ago, correct? Yeah.
So I think I need to sort out my audio. I don't know about
it's sounded very good today.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So that's a podcast. That you have a website. I just want to plug it for you.
Oh,
and
thank you.
On Twitter, you want to spell your Annie O'Brien, but what's the special?
So I'm Annie O'Brien, but Annie is spelled ANI, and so it's ANIOBRIEN. And my website is just www.thoughtcrimes.co.nz.
What's the special dots at the end? Dot what?
.co.nz. Okay. New Zealand, yeah.
And Z is Z in
it is.
If anybody is wondering.
I know. Hopefully people can understand me in my Kiwi accent.
No, I think it's charming and articulate.
That's good to hear.
Is there anything on a cultural level that you're doing beyond that? Are you a singer, weaver of tails or mittens or anything like that?
I don't do anything at the moment. I used to paint and write, but since feminism kind of required fighting again. I don't do a lot of that. So I do some writing. I used to put it on Medium, but I'm going to pop it on my website now. But it's mostly kind of like opinion writing and stuff. But no, I don't have any arts and crafts. There's some very cool feminist arts and crafts out there at the moment, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's I see them on.
Specific?
There is her name's Birdie something. She does like I don't know if they're paintings, but they're really cool of like iconic kind of feminists and stuff. And then there's I feel bad because I don't know their names, but there was a young woman the other day I saw. She makes like kind of funny videos, but she also does like knitting, I think, which was quite cool.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't mean to imply that you were a knitter, but I was just wondering if you had a craft or. But feminism does take up a lot of people's time when they get into it.
It does, and now we kind of know what we're doing now. We've been at it for a few years.
Yes.
So now it's a lot of like talking to politicians and trying to get those relationships and explaining to them the issues and stuff. And so it's a lot more involved than it was. It used to be like, okay, let's design a poster and we'll stick it everywhere. And, so it's become a lot more complex.
Okay. So, but now that you all have your footing, what's the challenge? What's the ray of hope from your position?
The ray of hope, I think it's gonna always lie in the masses. And I keep trying to think like, how do we get them to know about this? Because our media is very captured, right?
Yes.
So we can't get the message through the media. And so whenever there's research and surveys, it shows that the public is on our side, but we can't communicate them the issues that are happening. So I think the ray of hope is always going to be in finding a way to talk to the masses and communicate what's going on. And it is something I spend a lot of time thinking about. But I think the ordinary person is the hope here, because the ordinary person, wants everyone to be able to live their life discrimination-free and violence-free. Of course, they don't want trans people to be living miserable lives. But they also don't want their lives impacted by law changes that subvert reality and
freedoms.
And even though it might just be that they're outraged about the sport thing. It might be that, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they'd let a male play rugby in the women's team. Even if it's just that, people can see the unfairness. They can see when things are not quite right. And I think if we can get through to those ordinary people and just say, look, you just need to like raise your voice on this issue, because otherwise this is going to happen. So yeah, I reckon we can. We just got to find out a way.
It's so fascinating that these democracies, the elite and the demos, it's becoming. I mean, over time, I'm sure democracy has never been true, or I mean, we have republics too, so there's always a kind of a gap between the leaders and the led, or the elites and the normies. But it's just interesting to see that's happening again, and the media in the free world, so-called, is either failing at their jobs or are captured, which would mean failing at their jobs with a purpose.
Yeah, it's very pronounced, especially we don't have conservative media. So, I mean, I kind of look, so I look at CNN and Fox as kind of being like, two sides of the same coin, right? And that's not allowed to be said either. But we don't even have a crazy Fox kind of outlet where they would say stuff but not be taken particularly seriously by the left. We've just got pretty kind of captured liberal elite media, and they're so wound up in this identity politics. Our media, in my opinion, are far too friendly with politicians, And I think it creates a block for what ordinary people, like my group is just made up of a whole lot of women, mostly mums. I'm an anomaly, but there's mostly just a group of mums, and we want to talk about our cause, but there's this block because the media have decided that our cause is not right or worthy, and the political class is so tied up in what the media says is right and worthy that it's like we can't get through. So yeah, you're right. I think we say democracy, and yeah, there's, we have a vote and stuff, but how it plays out is not particularly democratic at times.
Yeah. And again, I think this was from the beginning. The means of grassroots campaigning are now being captured with Twitter and Facebook and everything. So where's the populace going to go? Where's the populism going to go?
Smoke signals, pigeons. I don't know. Like, it's like, what are we going to do? Do you guys have
pigeons out there? Do you just like have little kiwis, like with like some sort of genetic makeup that can go around past
We've got normal pigeons, like hanging out in the cities and stuff. Kiwis are really rare, so you have to either go to like a... Yeah.
But you guys named yourselves...
Well, we used to have heaps of them, but
Oh, okay. Just with the bald eagle
up.
Out here. Yeah, we do. We take a mascot and then we just kind of appropriate it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like sanctuaries and stuff, and there's heaps of them. But not heaps as they used to be.
Okay. Yeah. You don't have one at home? I guess your cats probably wouldn't treat it correctly.
Oh, my cats are such wusses that probably a kiwi
I do hear a bird.
Around.
Is that from outside or is that your friend?
Yeah, that's probably through the window. I live in right next to a reserve, so there's like lots
of... really? and it's basically high summer for you, right?
Yes, but I live in Wellington, which is the capital. And I'm an Aucklander, which is north. It's our biggest city, and it's Aucklander, and it's much hotter. I didn't realize when I moved here that it's colder down here. So I see my family and stuff on Instagram and Facebook, like at the beach and swimming, and I'm like,
yeah. Oh, you're wearing long underwear and palling around with your mittens.
So it's summer in theory, but like. I'm wearing jeans, and I wouldn't be doing
it's not the summer that you want.
Yeah.
Well, Annie, thank you for coming on. Thank you for allowing me to pester you into this hopefully productive conversation.
It was a good chat. There was like lots we covered there.
Yeah, I think so. And people are now aware of your product, your podcast, and I'll link all that in the description below. And you are very active on Twitter, and we have had kindly repartee from time to time, which is a pleasure.
Yeah, I spend probably too much time on Twitter, but
don't tell anybody that, because then they'll start doing purity politics.
I know. Yeah, I think it can be such a useful tool, but we can all be better at using it. I think.
Yeah. It's a tool that has a profound propensity to use its users.
Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure.
Well, I'm going to end the recording now. What are you up to? Congratulations for reaching the end of the discussion. If you enjoyed it, do be sure to leave a review or a comment or a thumbs up or whatever you need to do to show that glorious algorithm that this is some good stuff. And do be sure to go and check that back catalog, as it is brimming full of fantastic conversations. Links to provide monetary support are down there in the description as well. Have a good night.